Kitco News special coverage of the Future Blockchain Summit is brought to you by Cook Finance, a revolution in DeFi asset management.
We're here with Dr. Jane Thomason. She is the co-founder of the British Blockchain and Frontier Tech Association and author. Welcome to the show, Jane.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome to Kitco. You and I had just had a panel, and the theme of our discussion was the transformation to a digital economy from the fiat world. There's a lot of problems with this transformation, but let's talk about what you've observed already. You've studied and worked on the emerging markets, and you're telling me that people around the world are already using cryptocurrencies and blockchain in everyday transactions. So tell us about that, because there's a lot of skeptics out there who think that this is not possible, but you're seeing it already.
Yeah, and I think I refer people to the latest chain analysis report, because they've done a global report on cryptocurrency around the world, and they're reporting on the top 20 countries, what people are using it for, how much is going through it, and what you're seeing is a very rapid escalation in the adoption in emerging markets, particularly during the pandemic, and people are using it for different reasons. So in some countries, like Venezuela, for example, and now Afghanistan, they're using it as a store of value. In other countries, they're using it for peer-to-peer transactions. Maybe Nigeria is a good example of that. And that's more common in emerging markets. And in a lot of emerging markets, they were using it for foreign exchange, microtransactions in foreign exchange for receiving and sending remittances. So we've seen a lot of increase. And then the final one, which is honestly my favorite, is the play-to-earn games. Because play-to-earn games, and in particular Axie Infinity, but not only Axie Infinity, really took off, and they've made a video about it that went viral. People are earning money playing games to put food on their table of their families and keep them out of poverty. And that's really powerful. And now they have scholarship programs with Axie Infinity, which means if you can't afford yourself to buy an Axie and play an Axie, I'm going to subcontract some Axies to you. You play them for me, you have no financial risk, and then I receive maybe 30% of your winnings, but you receive 70% of your winnings. It's amazing.
Why do you think you said that it was more common, peer-to-peer transactions were more common in the emerging markets. Why is that?
Well, I think because they find it very difficult to to interact with their own currencies, and they don't have things like, the poor don't have credit cards. And so using mobile and sending and receiving and exchanging money is a lot easier for people if they've got mobile phones. Yeah. And also, if you've got a mobile phone, you're not carrying cash, people aren't robbing you. There's a whole lot of reasons why using mobiles is very useful in emerging economies.
Interesting development. We've seen that people are starting to replace traditional banking with their wallets, actually, because you and I just talked about how people were underbanked in the emerging markets. Many people across the world in developing nations don't have bank accounts. And what they're doing now is they're using cryptocurrencies on their phones to replace that service. How do you think that's going to change traditional finance?
Well, I think it's going to change it a lot. But I want to preface this by saying we're at the early stage of this innovation, so there's still a lot of risk around it. Right. But if you think about decentralized finance, that essentially allows all of the traditional finance functions to be undertaken directly without any intermediaries. There's no broker-dealers, there's no banks, there's no one in between a transaction between me and you, whether it's borrowing, lending, staking, or anything else. And so that means that anyone with a mobile phone and an internet connection is going to be able to participate in all of the traditional finance functions. So when you say how are banks reacting, I think a couple of things. One is they're all researching this and trying to understand how it's going to eat their cake. Right. I think what we're also seeing is a lot of them are either buying up DeFi companies or figuring out how they can offer those sorts of services as well. And so I think what we're going to see is a transformation of banks into different kinds of banks, and I think we're going to see some Kodak company banks who won't exist anymore.
Well, do you think this DeFi space would just replace banks altogether? Could you ever see yourself, for example, just forgoing your bank account and using whatever crypto services you already have?
Well, I think the question is, what do you use a bank account for? Right. And the quality and the safety of the alternative services. So for example, I've got some of my money in a crypto securities fund that's regulated on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. It's regulated, I trust it, I put my money there and I feel safe with that. That's not a bank, that's not a traditional security. And so I think you're going to see more people who are going to, in a regulated way, say we can look after your money. The issue with DeFi at the moment is there's tremendous risk. There's been a lot of famous DeFi scams, a lot of money's been stolen from DeFi platforms. There's questions around DeFi governance and how it operates. And so I think we're still at the point of really trying to understand how DeFi will develop. And the regulators are struggling because who do you regulate in DeFi? DeFi DAOs are governed by code and automated by code. So if a problem comes or people lose their money, who do you call? That's a big question, and I think that that's something that the regulators are trying to understand and struggle with and work out at the moment.
If they get frustrated in understanding or trying to understand, they could always take the Chinese government's approach, which is just ban it outright and say, we're going to have to not deal with this anymore. Do you see that ever happening in the West?
Look, I think it's variable. I think what people see now, because I really think the growth and explosion during 2020, 2021 and the movement of institutional investors into digital assets has really made government see what an economic opportunity this is. And in order to attract the companies and that kind of innovation, they need regulatory clarity. And so I think most countries and the European Union and others are realising they need to try and define that regulatory clarity so that people will come and will innovate and grow that economy.
So let's bring it back home now. So home could be in different places. You've lived in Australia. I'm from Canada. We're here in Dubai now. So let's talk about the advanced economies, the developed world. When can we see the critical mass turning point, so to speak, of adoption of digital currencies in the developed economies?
So I think, first of all, that point about regulatory clarity is really important, because you're not going to get a lot of the companies coming and transacting and interacting unless they know that they're safe and they're not going to get shut down. So that, I mean, in Australia, they're looking at this at the moment. They don't yet have it. They need to have it. I think the second thing is this issue about knowledge, understanding and education. I think there's a lot of people in countries like Australia and Canada and the US who've heard about cryptocurrencies, but they're a bit scared. They don't know how to get into it. They don't know how to understand, what would be a safe way for them to do it. And I think that that's why we're seeing the development of things like these Bitcoin ETFs and the regulated, fund in Amsterdam, because then people go, oh, yeah, maybe I could put my money into that and they'll look after it because they're regulated.
Well, as a Canadian, we have the privilege of enjoying some of the most advanced financial services in the world, and as do yourself. But let's just think about it more broadly. Why would somebody need cryptocurrencies as a peer-to-peer form of payment? What advantages do you see of using, let's say, Bitcoin or any other protocol to pay for your coffee or send money to a friend overseas? I can do that right now. When I go to the coffee shop, I scan with my credit card. That's digital money. When I want to send money overseas, I wire them through my bank. Of course, it takes a while, but it still works. So why do I need to switch to blockchain?
So I think, and I think that's why the emerging economies will go fastest, because we've already got really good financial systems and they work, and we probably don't notice the $2 transaction fee that is being paid every year. But you get the point. So we're prepared to accept that for the convenience, and other people who can't afford that means a lot too are more likely to go there. But I think what's attracting people to blockchain and digital assets at the moment is the DeFi and the potential earnings on DeFi, and the fact that people can become liquidity providers and earn interest on their crypto holdings, and that store of value as people predict that Bitcoin and Ethereum will go up. I think that's much more where both the retail and institutional investors are interested in advanced economies.
All right. Now, I want to talk about a topic that's not often discussed in media, which is the social impact of blockchain. And you've written a book about this, and your book is called The Blockchain Technology for Global Social Change. Tell us about that. Give us a synopsis.
Yeah, so back in 2016, when I first got involved in blockchain, no one was talking about blockchain and social impact. And I actually went and spoke to international institutions and governments and different people. And honestly, in 2017, they're going like, out the door, we don't want to hear about this terrible crypto thing. And so there was no environment for people to understand that blockchain is far more than crypto. So the reason that I and some other colleagues of mine wrote the book was we wanted people to see what were the prospects, how can this be used to achieve really quite transformative change. So what we did, we've explained it, we've taken a number of different sectors, if you like, from government to humanitarian to agricultural supply chains to healthcare and so forth, and done a review of who are doing the projects, what do the projects look like, and then we did a number of case studies. So you go, here's something that's happening in agricultural insurance for poor farmers in India. Here's something that's digitising women's cooperatives in Mali. And then people can read it and go, oh, okay, I see how that can help, and I see how major social transformation can come from this kind of decentralised approach. And we have a model that we developed that sort of maps out how we think that social transformation will take place.
Okay. I want to talk about socioeconomic changes first, but before that, I want to talk about microfinancing, the possibility of enhancing microfinances in the developed or the developing economies through blockchain. Are we seeing that happening right now?
Absolutely. And I think that, again, look at Chain Analysis report, because it's saying that the majority of the interactions in many developing countries are very small amounts and peer-to-peer. And so you're absolutely seeing that. And it's giving these micro entrepreneurs opportunities to be able to.
How are they accessing these kinds of crypto funds?
On a mobile phone, because 70% of the world have got mobile phones now, and a lot of solutions that are being developed in New York are probably for super smartphones on 4 and 5G. But people are developing these solutions for Androids in developing countries.
Would you say it would be easier for, let's say, a farmer in a developing economy to get a loan through a blockchain network than through a bank?
Well, absolutely. But the thing is, and this is where people are doing really interesting work, is you can't get a loan unless you've got a credit rating. Yeah. So as an example, there's a company called Hive Online, where a woman called Sophie Blackstead is behind that, and they're developing alternative credit ratings for people through using blockchain and digital currencies. So you're kind of building up a credit history by looking at how they interact with the currencies, they repay small loans and so forth, which then can give lenders, blockchain lenders, not necessarily banks, confidence that these people are safe to lend to. So people are doing that.
Okay. And do you see any major socioeconomic changes here in developed nations, North America, Europe, Australia, through blockchain technologies?
We're going to be too slow. We're going to be too slow. The pivot is honestly going to go to emerging markets. We're going to see that kind of, exciting development, even having a look at the number of companies around, Asia and India and Vietnam and Philippines that are now doing NFTs and DeFi and all of this play-to-earn games. They're going to go fastest because they see the benefit.
Finally, you're giving your presentation here in the Future Blockchain Summit in Dubai. Give us a synopsis of what you'll be discussing.
So what I'm going to talk about is how stablecoins can be a channel for financial inclusion for the poor. And I'm going to kind of go through that and explain why and how and what are the different functions that stablecoins could be quite beneficial to the poor for. But always remembering, all they need is a mobile phone with a connection. That is so transformational as compared with needing to try and have an identity that's registered by the government to go to a bank, have 100 points of, evidence to be able to get a bank account. This is going to change everything.
I am curious as to what the answer to the question that you posed is how stablecoins could benefit the poor. Why couldn't the US dollar benefit the poor? Because when you think about it, a stablecoin is based on, many stablecoins are just based on the US dollar. So what is the benefit of having a stablecoin versus just having traditional fiat currency, let's say the US dollar?
You want to drive around with a truck with people who don't have banks and dish out a few US dollars. Yeah. That's the point you have to understand, that a lot of these people, there are no banks. They have no even if they had an identity or a credit score, there are no financial institutions in the rural areas that they can go to. So if they can receive this directly onto their mobile phone, that changes things. And without the cost of the normal transfer of fiat currency, which is, can be anything up to 20%. The remittance corridors are super expensive.
I wonder how this is just broader thinking. I wonder how this is going to impact global geopolitics, because presumably if an entire country were to be less reliant on the US dollar for their commerce, that could put significant downward pressure on the US dollar, on the governments. That could mean that the US dollar could potentially lose its reserve as a global currency reserve. That could mean that a stable coin could possibly take up that role. What do you think?
Well, look, I think that this is absolutely the case, and the G7 just released something in the last couple of days talking about how digital assets shouldn't undermine financial stability, because they can see that this is the possibility. But if I can just draw the big picture, so we've got Bitcoin, which we all know about, which is not a stable coin, but you've got a whole lot of innovators who are now developing these stable coins to transact, many of them backed by US dollar, but some of them backed by gold. But then you've got China with its digital yuan, which once that rolls out, potentially could roll out into all of the Belt and Road countries, which is over 100 countries, and China could be demanding that they use that to transact, which gives them tremendous power, which will compete with the US dollars. But we shouldn't forget the big techs, because all the big techs, Amazon, Google, Facebook and so forth. So Facebook sort of got everyone excited when they announced the Libra coin. But believe you me, all of those big techs are looking at how they can provide financial services, and they have the populations. They have billions of populations who are using their platforms every day, and if they can just make it easy to provide financial services in there, they will. So I think we don't know.
And just to your point is on how several different economies are coming up with their own CBDCs, do you see any currency, whether it be a CBDC or a stable coin, or potentially another fiat currency, for example, that could, down the line, challenge the US dollar? Inevitably, I think that this will be the case. It's just we don't know how it's going to unfold. And the issue just with the CBDCs is every country can have a CBDC, but if it's not interoperable and people can't get it across borders, it's still going to be a problem. But, I would make a call that China absolutely could if they roll out into the Belt and Road countries. And maybe some of the big techs if they had a mind to do so. Because you can only shut them down in one jurisdiction. So unless everyone got together to shut them down, it's very hard to deal with companies that operate across multiple jurisdictions. Okay. Jane, thank you so much for coming on the show today, and welcome to Kitco.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you for watching Kitco News. We'll have more for you at the blockchain conference in Dubai.
Kitco News special coverage of the Future Blockchain Summit is brought to you by Cook Finance, a revolution in DeFi asset management.